Well, that's a pretty painting. Nice color choices, energetic brushwork, dynamic presence, smooth lighting, fulfilling composition, delves a little into my vulnerable side. An all-around nice viewing experience. You might say it's quite beautiful. But what does beautiful mean? Like, it has some spirit to it, some charm. It's not just sitting there, it's engaging you. Engaging me? There's like a meaning to it or something, I don't know. It has a presence, you might say. The point is, something inside of you is different because you looked at this. Something moved. Something is illuminated. The phenomenon of life feels slightly different now. Now there is something else that moves. A different set of values that illuminates something different in me. And life becomes a different phenomenon once again. Now a different value system once more, and something in me changes again, culminating in yet another adjustment to the phenomenon of life. What is that little thing that moves when I look inside of someone else's imagination? What is it that lights up? How do we study it? Is it worth attempting an answer to that ever-elusive question, what are people after all? As time goes on, are we getting closer, or are we getting further away? And are the people of the past so far behind us as we think? Take a visit to the monastery and listen to a lecture from Sandro Sebastian, the art monk. Here's an interview question for you, Sandro Sebastian. Give us another description of how being an artist works. You sell something that we don't need in order to survive, and you seem like a bunch of self-obsessed narcissists who just want an excuse to check out of society and avoid getting a real job. What is the purpose of what you do? Well, let me begin by saying that I very much agree with your astute observation of what most artists in the world are trying to do. For most of them, it is just an excuse to live inside of your own narcissistic bubble and refuse to accept that your dweeby little inner world that you are so proud of isn't really that special or unique. It is rather common, and the rest of us have as much interest in it as you might have in any one of ours. But let me get into my answer for what makes me different by first describing the hazards of this occupation. Among the items on the very long list of why no one in this field recommends it, I will say that you have to learn a lot of skills that are not taught in school and not taught in any other work environment, skills that have no practical value anywhere else in society. It's not like getting a job in an office, where you learn office assistant or management skills that can be applied to multiple industries. Get a job in human resources or customer service, and you can do the hiring at an insurance firm, doctor's medical practice, legal firm, retail outlet, restaurant, factory, warehouse, educational institution. Keeps you mobile. Or, if you are a police officer, you can move into criminal justice as a lawyer, either a public defender or prosecuting attorney, or you can later work for the FBI or some other law enforcement entity. It's a skill set with multiple applications. Or you can move from street cop to security guard or a bouncer at a club even. For some extra dough on the side, a practical skill gives you practical options. Being an artist, however, is an ever-expanding list of skills that have no practical value whatsoever. You are just some wise-ass that thinks he can outrun the system long enough to get your cheeky little thing out there in front of our eyes before they catch you. Not a recommended existence. A career in the arts. It's more fun to be in the audience, trust me. Because it's so exciting to watch someone be famous, we think it would be exciting to be famous ourselves. That's the mistake we make. When someone makes it as an artist, if they are a public personality being interviewed, they always ask that silly question. Interviewer, what would you do if you were not an artist? Starve? Question mark. Fuck if I know. Why, are you hiring? Give me something. These are all skills that can't easily be used in other fields, other businesses, or for other employers. It just depends on how badly we need to see whatever it is you've got here, or how much you enjoy having an excuse to be a wise ass in front of everyone, just to prove that you can get away with it. You just have to be that kind of person, I guess, but I wouldn't know. So making a living at art is something I don't recommend, but to make art, the actual pieces themselves, I will tell you, there's only one thing you have to do. To make art, all you have to do is believe in magic. And I mean that with utmost sincerity. The harder you believe in it, the better the art. That's my theory as to what makes a classical historical work of art something that we cherish and love, and preserve in a museum for future generations to inspire and orient themselves on the timeline of humanity. What separates a masterful, eternal work of art from just another pop art piece in a commercial gallery, or the pop music on the drive home from work, or Hollywood summer blockbuster, what separates the masterful, eternal piece is that we know that somebody put in all that extra time and effort, and dealt with the logistical nightmare of that life I've been describing. Someone had to choose to be broke for a number of years, limit their social life, look awkward to their family, face constant rejection and harsh words from critics, and in the beginning to have the critics be right, to have the audience boo you off stage, and in the beginning to have the audience be right, because you're still finding it. Someone had to stick it out and persevere through all of that. And that's how we have this right here, this masterpiece. I really don't understand what people mean, and have never understood this description of art practice, that it is about expressing yourself. No, it's not. People are so presumptuous to assume that something happening here is about you. Why do people use art making as an excuse to just be a weirdo in front of strangers, with hopes of being appreciated for it? In the professional world, you have to set up a divider between your dweeby little inner world that you carry around all day and live inside of, looking out at the rest of us from your perspective only, a divider between that and the outer real world. Know where one stops and the other begins. Very crucial, or you will look unprofessional. Since we've been living with our dweeby little inner world since we were small children on the playground, it is something we all cherish and adore about ourselves, and there isn't anything inherently wrong with that, but when it's time to grow up and be professional, get a job and collaborate with other adults, you have to set up that divider between the two. You can't blend the two in your mind, like when you were a kid. When you're young, you can't see how inappropriate you look because you're still learning. That's why we don't hire kids to work jobs, and why young adults who are new to the adult world only work entry-level jobs, where there's not a whole lot at stake, to figure out how to separate your dweeby little inner world from the real world out there and not take it all personally. On-the-job training, you might call it. Okay, so it's not that people don't like me, says the young adult. This just isn't all about me, because it's not all about anyone. That explains a lot. Now you're ready for your real life to begin. The less you take everything personally, and the more you understand just how far from the center of the universe you are, the more you get out of life. For the life of me, I cannot understand why people think that a career in the arts should be any different. I think a lot of people want to be artists so that I don't have to separate my dweeby little inner world from the real one outside of me. I can just be self-absorbed and assert my inner world out there and watch people be impressed with it. Like the rules of propriety won't apply to me or something. I have no idea where this kind of thinking comes from. I mean, how impressed are you when you witness other people do that? How much of a crap do you give about other people's dweeby little inner worlds? Exactly. So what makes yours so special? You forget that since the rest of us do not live inside of your head all day, that once your inner world thoughts leave that head of yours and travel into the space between us, to the eyes of the rest of us, it just reads as nonsense, until you bother to translate it for us, and therein lies the skill of the craft. An artist has to not only possess a good imagination, but be a capable communicator. If shouting your dweeby little inner world into the space between us, with no translation or thought of communication whatsoever, if that was how art worked, then why is most of the art in the world not good? Most stuff that people recommend to you has no appeal to anyone but the person who made it and possibly their mother. Why is that? If it's simply about expressing yourself, wouldn't it all be good? As a wise man once said, don't take advice from most people on how to get rich, because most people are not rich. Sandro Sebastian would add, don't take advice from most people on how to make good art, because most people don't make good art. I have to look at what most people do and decide what am I going to do differently. I don't know that there's a friendly, politically correct way to say this, but the way to get good at any art form is to figure out why there are so many bad ones to begin with. That's what getting better at something is. Then, after facing initial rejection for months or years, to pick yourself back up and lose the ego and decide that the world is a bigger place than I thought it was, and I have to up the ante on what I'm doing, buckle down and think deeper. I have to upgrade my worldview and lose some old values that I thought were super cool and innovative, ideas that I thought were rare and mysterious and unique to me, but in reality are actually quite common. Lots of people think like that, Sandro. And seeing my work on a wall in line with a dozen others just like me. Oh, so I have to go out of my way to find a less common way of looking at humanity, I soon realize. I have to take more chances and make more sacrifices and be uncomfortable. You're crazy if you think my work has anything to do with my own personal worldview. Like this is the way I want to look at art? Or the way I want to look at humanity? This is what I want the human identity to be? That has nothing to do with it because I didn't invent people. It's not up to me. As I mentioned before, the point is to set up a divider between your dweeby little inner world and the exterior world and translate it for us so we can be enlightened. I've never understood why people think art is the opposite. Like, being an artist is an excuse to ignore the divider between my dweeby little inner world and the exterior one. I just want an excuse to be a weirdo in front of strangers and be praised for it. There's a word for that. It's called narcissism, and it's classified as a personality disorder. Did you hear that? Narcissism is not a personality trait. It is a personality disorder. The rest of us are not interested in your personality disorder. Since the rest of us don't live inside of your head all day, and didn't grow up in the way you did, and the rest of us weren't raised by your parents, didn't grow up in your community, don't belong to your social demographic, weren't educated at your schools, didn't grow up in your time period, didn't experience your transition from life inside the home, which is different for everybody, to life outside the home, which is different for everybody, don't share your political beliefs and or religious beliefs, don't see what you see when you look at humanity, and subsequently, we don't fill in the blanks with the same assumptions that you do. And ultimately, the rest of us don't use the same criteria to determine what is fact and what is fiction. Who is telling the truth out there, and who is lying to our faces? Because we all have to decide somehow. It's just part of being a person, whether we are comfortable with it or not. Because of all of this, all of these items on this list, the rest of us don't have the same values as you. And this even gives me trouble because now, As the presenter, I have to figure out how to not take my own worldview for granted as normal, whoever I am. As does any presenter. It's not that you are a terrible person, it's just that your personal life experiences may make the world look like a certain kind of place that it is not. And coupled with the way that you fill in the blanks with your imagination, you get tricked into thinking something is happening that is not happening. Then you go out there and conduct yourself in a way that makes you look like an escaped mental patient. And there are parts of your personality that the rest of us might not get, or might even rub us the wrong way. But to add another item to this list, at the end of it all, that's why Jesus forgives. Because you have no idea how wrong you can be about something until after someone else gets hurt. Remember, good people, rule number 1 of professionalism in the adult world. It's not that we don't like you, it's just that we don't know you. Those two are not the same thing. In fact, they are nowhere near each other, so don't sweat it. Everybody looks like an escaped mental patient to somebody. As a conclusive note, and finally describing in direct terms what I believe my field is for, I believe that handmade objects and handmade items that give off the aura of the human identity and describe to us that which makes us vulnerable on the inside, I do believe that that is going to make a comeback in the modern world. It has to, because we are all for the first time living in a world where most of the stuff you see is made by a machine. And the only humanity we get is the small slice from the person using the machine. But for the most part, the human identity is undermined, abbreviated, stifled, and obscured in the modern world. So the young people who grow up taking the machines for granted as normal never experience the delicate parts of the human identity that you need to know in order to feel appropriate about yourself and understand what separates us from the animals. Handmade art these days will give us a confidence boost that the government or formal education system cannot. This confidence is necessary for certain life challenges that everybody faces, and certain life decisions we all have to make at some point. Do I hang out with these people? Do I work at this job where they pay me more but respect me less? Or the job where they pay me less but respect me more? And when I'm not living with my parents anymore full time, how often do I see them? Do I have to do Thanksgiving and Christmas every single year? Do I need to explore parts of my adult personality in private? Parts of my personality that the parents don't quite understand? God love them. All of your answers depend on your notion of what people are. And what do we need in order to feel appropriate about ourselves? This is not the same thing as what makes me happy. Happiness is kind of a made-up thing anyway, one discovers. Like you get married in order to be happy. No. You get married so you can feel appropriate about yourself. That part of your psychology is much more delicate. Most of the art in the world will just be your boyfriend, who you find exciting, and gives you a buzz. Sandro Sebastian art will be your husband, who helps you stabilize your identity and feel appropriate about yourself. There's an increasingly popular phenomenon these days of trying to see how much I can get away with not having to use my head in life. It wasn't always like this, though, where no one wants to have to think things through or consider alternate possibilities. Like it's not fair to ask me to use my head, asking me to respond to a situation according to something deeper than what's on the surface and use abstract reasoning, not just act on my impulses. No, that's not fair. It's not fashionable to do that. I shouldn't have to do that. I should be able to rearrange everything in society and reformat the rules of being a person so that I don't have to do anything but act on my immediate impulse and make decisions based on a superficial overview of the situation. To ask me to do more than that is like almost like that's asking too much of a person. Yeah, because what could possibly go wrong, right? It's weird how nowadays every generation of artists, and you really see this when you're in art school, wants to be able to live like there was no one here before me and there won't be anyone here after me. Like everything that's happening in the world and in life is happening right in front of us, right here, right now, inside of our field of vision. There's no such thing as anything happening outside of my field of vision. When in reality, that's actually where most of the stuff is happening. Hate to break it to you, friend. I think it was back in college when I had my first real awakening as to how small I was, and how small we all are as a civilization. I discovered the great Renaissance and Baroque masters, which compelled me more than any artist today, and made me think, maybe I don't know everything after all, or maybe we don't know everything after all. And maybe the way that we as a society look at the world and look at life isn't really that great. We just choose this worldview for lack of a better idea, because we've got nothing to compare it to. Now, you don't really think of it this way, but the way you've been conditioned to look at the world around you is by way of someone else's imagination, even if you don't want to admit it. Someone who may or may not be smarter than you. All the images that you've looked at on television, in advertisements, the billboards on the drive to work, or the JPEGs on the internet, the closest thing that most of you get to an art exhibition is those things, like the billboards on the drive to work, or the magazine covers on the checkout aisle of the grocery stores. That's the only photography exhibit you guys get. All of these come from someone else's imagination, the shape of which is determined by their overall worldview. Art is not really a discussion of how the world actually is, but more how the world looks to us inside of our heads, because that's all we have to work with. But that's what makes it interesting. That's what makes it a useful exercise. You're getting to see how the world looks inside of someone else's head. But with that worldview, with someone else's worldview filling your reality, coming from other people's imaginations, I noticed that all of their insecurities, their shortcomings, anxieties, and general ignorance is passed on to you. So as a culture, we all share the same insecurities and anxieties that are so common in our time period that they just look normal. Like this is just the way a human life is. Now you might look at some of my paintings and think, okay, well, why don't like movies and television shows have this level of depth with their images on the screen, like the paintings of Sandro Sebastian? Why don't all images do this? Well, that's because I bothered to go out of my way to take advice, in air quotes, from other times and places and other cultures and societies that don't have our insecurities or superficial notion of things. That's how I'm able to imagine a possibility beyond the world created for me by people without half the imagination I've got. People that are more gullible and insecure, more easily intimidated and short-sighted. I don't need all those negative qualities passed on to me, stifling my growth, because this is the best that you could come up with. It's amazing how you reach a certain age and you start assessing how you're going to live with yourself for the next couple decades, and you realize that we really do waste our lives chasing after things that don't exist. Or either they don't exist or you do catch them, but they turn out to be overrated. And on the other side of that same coin, we waste our lives being afraid of things that can't hurt us, or intimidated by things that are not that fearsome. All of these insecurities spill over into the things that we make and define our worldview as we absorb television, pop radio, movies, internet JPEGs, and the billboards on the drive to work All of these things define how you see the world in your head, even though you don't want to admit it due to your narcissism. But, hanging on to your narcissism and not admitting that you have work to do, that you need to let certain things go, that is the number one way to miss out on your life. Your mind exists inside of a cage that it is not aware it is inside of. And yes, it does influence your behavior. I was so mesmerized to discover a time and place where all these modern day insecurities and this type of ignorance didn't yet exist and didn't define our reality. Isn't that always nice? Looking at people like Velázquez and Caravaggio, Botticelli or Mantegna, like, wow, there was a time and place where people had the guts to think like this, just let it all go. So why have we forgotten it? It seems pretty useful. But then, of course, you try it and you see how it's not as easy as it looks. And that challenge is really what compelled me. Okay, so apparently I won't be able to do this just because I all of a sudden want to. It's going to take some time and some discipline. Going to have to kneel down and show some respect if you want results. Let everyone else waste their lives looking for shortcuts. Because how many of you actually find any? Come on now. Most of you out there, though, have never had an experience where God pulls you aside and pulls back the physical curtain of this world, showing you the vastness of the world of the other side, the non-physical part of the universe. The physical stuff we are surrounded by is just the tip of the iceberg. But people swear by it like this is all there is. Ugh. Let me tell you, I know you think you're pretty cool, you think you're pretty cute, pretty clever, like you don't have anything to be afraid of. Oh, honey. You think you know fear. You don't know fear until you feel God's eyes looking directly at you as an individual, not a member of your nation or race or social class or age group or gender or occupation or a member of your particular era of human civilization like the early 21st century, when you feel him looking at you as an individual. Like not just now, but spreading across all time periods that have ever happened or ever will happen, when you feel his eyes directly on you. Even when you're reading a passage in the Bible of the Hebrews carrying the Ark of the Covenant over the river Jordan to get to Jericho, led by Joshua. Yeah, let me tell you when that happened to me when I was reading that passage. Joshua 3:14, just so you have a reminder. When the people set out to cross the Jordan, the priests who were carrying the Ark of the Covenant went ahead of them. Now it was the harvest season, and the Jordan was overflowing its banks. But as soon as the feet of the priests who were carrying the ark touched at water the river's edge, the water began piling up at a town upstream called Adam, which is near Zarethan. And the water below that point flowed on to the Dead Sea until the riverbed was dry. Then all the people crossed over near the city of Jericho. Meanwhile, the priests who were carrying the Ark of the Lord's covenant stood on dry ground in the middle of the riverbed as the people passed by them. They waited there until everyone had crossed the Jordan on dry ground. I had an experience maybe several months ago where I read that passage and seeing the Lord demonstrate his power and thinking about what course my life had taken at this point. The overlap in presence here really had me jumping out of my skin. This entity that's causing the waters to recede, I recognize his style, if you will, his capability and his compassion. I see all of that happening in my life right now. The similarities are too remarkable to ignore, especially taking into account how much the average, and I do mean average, person takes for granted in life. It's the same God, the same decision maker moving things around in my life. I recognized the stroke of his brush, so to speak, and it made my hair stand on end. And not to examine too closely, but while reading that passage, performing that miracle all those centuries ago, I feel him looking directly at me as an individual while he's doing that. So if he sees us as individuals, that means he's going to judge us as individuals. So you need to not live a Christian life on autopilot, only believing in the parts that overlap with your own worldview, because your worldview really isn't all that great. That's why you got problems, man. You need to take manual control and actively live like you're afraid of this. But it explains. No wonder self-indulgence is so overrated. Because that's just not what being a person is about. People just think it's magnificent because they have nothing to compare it to. The truth is that when God made you, He really did make you perfect. But people started teaching you to doubt yourself. You know what I mean? And you were so young, you didn't know any better. You went along with it because you wanted to be socially accepted. Now, as an adult, you realize that nobody really knows what's going on here. So hopefully you can reclaim some of the pure and brilliant parts of you that were lost along the way. I, as an individual, just got lucky through a series of very particular life circumstances, and my steps being guided by a hand greater than all of you, all of us. I had an excuse to hold on to the part of me that was born perfect. It still doesn't flinch to this day. Other parts of me have succumbed over the years, obviously, because no one's perfect. I'm only human, but this part of me shines more brightly all the time. So God must have chosen me for a reason. This kind of thing doesn't just happen every day or every century. If this doesn't scare you, then nothing will.